Dobrý den, vítejte u podcastu Plus, který se zabývá děním v současném tanci. U mikrofonu vás vítá Hana Polanská. Jelikož dnes jsou našimi hostkami zahraniční umělkyně, dnešní podcast bude probíhat v angličtině. K dispozici však bude samozřejmě i překlad do češtiny. Let me introduce the guest and the topic of today's podcast. We'll be discussing improvisation with artists and professionals who have long been interested in improvisation as a strategy for creating, as well as the history of the development of the discipline and everything related to it. Our invitation was accepted by Imagery from the Faculty of Theatre and Crew Collective.
Hello.
And Janka Novoritová from Crew Collective.
Hello.
Who will talk with the heirs of postmodern dance and queens of improvisation on the international scene, Bettina Neuhaus.
Hello.
And Karczag.
Hello.
And now I give the floor to Ms. Rice.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to say at the beginning that this is not going to be an interview, but rather a discussion. So I will throw in some questions, and some of them may not be questions, but maybe opinions, and from that some questions may arise. And I'd like to start with a very general one, also for the audiences to get orientated in the topic. So the form of instant composition, improvisation, dance improvisation on stage, also sometimes called real-time choreography or open free improvisation, and it has actually many names and many labels. It developed this form as a response to many threats in certain time. It is usually associated with the times of the 1960s and 70s and a specific place or location, which is New York in the US. And it was a response to some concepts, like old concepts in modern dance and dance theater and how to interpret it. New forms that emerged in music through the person of John Cage. New concepts of what dance can be that were brought by approach of Anne Halprin, Simon Forti, or Robert Dunn and his workshops, and many others. And of course, I mustn't forget Eastern philosophies and also cultural changes and political changes in society at that time in the 60s. The development of women's rights, the development of African American rights, voices for minorities and all that. So where do you think, that's my first question for you, Eva and Bettina, where do you think that there is still place and also time for instant composition? And is it still relevant to do it? And why do you do it? And why do you invite audiences to see your performances?
Well, I think this time in the world is definitely filled with similar kinds of upheavals to the kinds of upheavals that were very present in the 1960s. And we have moved on, but a lot of those struggles are still here, whether it's women or minorities or immigrants or well, there are many, many issues that are still with us. Of course, we're asking the questions somewhat differently, which is good, but we are still asking these questions. And in terms of moving away from outdated traditional dance forms, we're still there. It's that hasn't changed hugely.
Yeah, I would like to add that improvising is for me a part of the way how we are dealing with creativity. So I feel like we are improvising in the everyday life. almost all the time as we are composing a dish or dealing with situations. So I feel improvising in itself is so much part of how we handle our creativity. And I would like to point that out as alongside this question about why we might think there is still the right time to improvise.
Mm-hmm. When I think of Judson Dance Theatre or Grand Union, these collectives that emerged as a response to certain hierarchies and structures, it comes to my mind, Eva, that you also dance for quite a long time in those, I would say, maybe rigid structures of big ballet companies, professional dancing companies. And these formats of instant composition or improvisation at that time developed as democratic forms. And it also comes to my mind Steve Paxton and how he developed with his colleagues contact improvisation as a democratic form. Questions asked through movement and through no hierarchy. So I guess my question here is, how do you think, or if you can see it in your practice, what you do in the studio, how does that relate and translate to the everyday outside world that you live in, if you deal with certain structures at all? If you maybe teach as invited by some institution, or if you have to function in a certain political structure.
Well, I think that's a very important aspect of the work that I do, that it is democratic and individuals are treated as equals with respect. I was very much drawn to this way of working because of what I had experienced in my previous training and professional life. Not that it was all that long, but it was definitely enough of that. And my shift into films where I felt that I could actually be who I am and be able to give my voice to what was happening felt very important to me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. For me, instant composition in performance is a rigorous practice. It's a discipline that reveals not only skills of the performer, but really the ability to notice and listen. So I would like to ask Janka, how do you think one can train for this form?
You have to do it. You have to do it and do it and do it and do it. And through doing it, you arrive to certain, you understand, you acknowledge, you name things for yourself and you experience. And all that enriches the practice, and more you do it, more you are able to do it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Recently, I would say that improvisation also gained certain attention, let's say, at the academia, in the academic world. And recently, in the last, let's say, 20 years, perhaps, some papers and publications emerged that try to not only involve the practitioners to share their experience from their point of view, which were actually the first and original texts also that reflected on this practice. But there are also other papers that look at instant composition from a different point of view, from different field, for example, phenomenology or cultural psychology, and it has overreach to different fields like embodied pedagogy, for example. How does this work inform you as practitioners? This is all question for Eva, Bettina, and also Jana.
Mm-hmm. I would say reading these papers give inspiration. They can clarify for me my own experience, my own thinking process and reflections. They can help clarifying my language that feels, appropriate to the work. And it can be very stimulating, as well as questioning what is my understanding of the practice. So I feel it's like enlarging my horizon, because I feel the necessity and the importance of verbalizing, of finding a language I can handle or I can transmit the practice either to others or using the language to work myself. So I feel it is very enriching and very important for me.
I think for me it's very important that our work is taken seriously enough to warrant the writings that are happening. And I think that the kind of work we do has definitely an intellectual aspect to it, which I think is important to acknowledge. And many of the books and articles that are being written are actually written by dancers about the work that they're experiencing, which is very different to critics writing about dances that they see only. So, yes, I feel it's valuable. As Bettina, you said, for me, it's very inspiring. It opens me up to different aspects of the work that I do. And we should have a lot of it and a lot more of it.
Mm-hmm. I would also add that writings about the practice create a context, or can create a larger context. And for me personally, it's very important that the work I'm creating and has a larger context. My interest is less in being a singular island turning around itself, but that it can root and can resonate within a larger context and feed into context, as well as the context is feeding my work. And I also believe that these articles or papers, written reflections about the different angles of the work, can be very feeding into a communal, not a communal understanding, but for people to have the ability to access this information and to take reflections into their own process, whether it's teaching or performing or lecturing, so that the work can have more layers.
Yeah. That's exactly what I feel, that it is yet another layer where the work can exist. Mm-hmm. And why I think it is also important, and now I say it is important for me, to read about the work and also to write about the work is me learning through doing that. And I hope that it also how would I put it? Like that I learn through that allows others to learn through that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And especially maybe because this practice is always done not as a solo as well, but we met in the studio. We now worked for 5 days in the studio. Bettina and Eva shared with us their performance lecture on the day 0, actually.
Yeah.
And now we are sitting here after 5 days of experience of working together through some thorough somatic work, but also some analysis and reflection of that work. And for me, the analysis is really crucial part of this practice, so that it is not just experienced, but it is also put into some perspective, and so that the experienced is somehow contextualized, not just in my body, but in the context of when and where I live. And if I zoom out of that, which is a context of a certain time and place of now, but that obviously is connected to certain time and place of the before, and is totally connected to the time and place of what will come.
Yeah.
I noticed in your workshop, both you, Eva, and Bettina, you consciously incorporate this work to cultivate not just the body and the senses and the knowledge or intelligence of the body, but also the inner observer, the way to see, to watch, to notice. And I see this as really important, and I notice that many experienced artists and lecturers work with that consciously, to develop and to give tools to the practitioners, participants of the workshops, how to watch, how to observe. So I'd like to ask you, when you go and see performances that are improvised, what do you notice? How do you watch?
Well, before speaking to your question, I would also like to add choice making, which is very much a part of what happens when you observe, when you watch. You can actually make choices about what to do next.
Yes.
And for me, when you watch improvisation or improvised performances, I'm really interested in the choices that the performer makes. I'm interested in the physicality also, but very much what they will choose to do next, how they will respond to certain situations.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I'm really interested in presence, how present the performer is.
You said something.
Sorry. Not that those things aren't important when I watch set work too, but with improvisation, I know that it's happening in the moment. It hasn't been pre-decided.
Mm-hmm.
You said something beforehand about creativity, so the demand on being creative, and I would respond to that I feel we are here with an abundance of individual creativity that will be hard to put into manifestation within one lifetime, I would say. So for me it's less the question how to be creative, but more the question how do I handle my creativity within instant composition or a improvised piece, or in general.
Yeah.
In general, I would say, yeah. And when watching an improvised piece, I'm looking for, or I'm wondered how I'm moved, how I'm touched by what I see. So what is the piece is one thing I'm curious about. How, yeah, where the moments where something touches me and moves me. The presence of the performer, and sometimes it's a detail that calls my attention to zoom into, and sometimes the situation calls me to zoom out. Yes, and sometimes, as Eva said, what choices does a performer make? But also, what is the overall setting? So how does a piece begin, for example? What is the setting on stage, objects, light? Perhaps sometimes also how I'm invited to participate in my presence in space. I think that is also something that keeps me busy since quite a while.
Isn't all of this also important when you watch any piece?
Yes,
Not
for sure.
just an improvised piece, because those are elements that I'm always seeking for when I watch whatever show. Like the for instance, the presence of the performer.
Yes.
Because then, even if the show is set, there's still, it's not always the same, right? So and you can see those moments where they have to take this, like make a decision about certain situation that just comes up, and that's very exciting to see how they withstand that within the even set choreography.
Yeah, I would add to that. For me, it's not necessarily important to know beforehand whether a piece is improvised or not. I'm interested in seeing work, and that's why I go to a theater, because I want to experience something. I want to be in that space or the world of theater, and to be moved and to participate as an audience. That, I would say, is the primary interest or motivation.
I would like to ask, as a performers on stage who compose in this radical time, how do you work with imagery, or how do you approach imagery? Does the imagery come from anatomy, or does it come from your relation to sensations of the body, proprioception, or gestures, emotions? What works for you, and what keeps you interested in the dance?
I think imagery is so much a part of the way we work, that I tend to not highlight it in any way. It is that I most of the time let it arise, and then I let it do its job. Imagery can be so many things, and sometimes people connect to one thing, other people connect to another. I remember Andre Bernard, who I studied with, did idiokinesis, which is a practice that uses imagery rather than muscular force to create change in the way the body is integrated. And he would say, well, if this image doesn't work for you, then make up your own. And I really have followed that very, very rigorously in the way that I use imagery. It can be anatomical, it can be visual, it can be auditory, it can be sensory, it can be something outside of me or something inside of me. Imagery is huge.
I would relate to or would connect to that and say, I mean, I'm not able to distinguish a particular zone of imagery that I'm particularly working with, because I feel we live through imagery in this world that's in the body, that is outside of us, and that's how I think we read and understand in terms of experiencing the world. It's through images and imagery, and in a situation on stage there might be different imageries present, and it can be, as Eva said, it could be outside, but it could be in the body, and it could be sound or space or a configuration of my colleagues. And for me, it's in a way always there.
And imagery is deeply related to language. And I noticed not just in this workshop, but in the work that we do, that language has a very specific place, very important place, because through the language and the way you offer things to the participants, or the way you give the instruction or a task, totally opens certain areas of imagery that you dare to enter. And I noticed that in most of the work of people who are improvising for a long time, they have a very generous way of offering this space. And I'm noticing this because I'm involved in pedagogy, and my current research with Janka is about pedagogy and how to cultivate the ability to notice and see with the skill of the body in the students, in the academia. And so we pay a lot of attention to the language and how things are said and offered. And when I'm asked, for example, so what did you do today at the workshop? And I say, we touched air. You can't touch air. Just this invitation to imagine differently the world, to look at an ordinary situation of waiting in a tram stop. And you see the composition of the people waiting, and you see how they relate to each other, to space. You really see micro situations, but also small body movements. And all of that can really be perceived as a small performance or instant composition of a sort. So this training of the way I see, for me, goes hand in hand with the training of the body. And I'm trying to make a bridge here towards pedagogy. And I'd like to give a word to Janka, because she has some specific question about that.
For me, you are opening my imagination, but at the same time, I feel very safe. Mm-hmm. I'm in a harmless environment where things can happen, and I'm allowed to do stuff, to be who I am, exactly how Eva described it at the very beginning of the interview. If you can say something about it.
one thing I can say is that in my own training, in my music training, but also in my dance training, I had some wonderful teachers who had the ability to offer tasks as an invitation in which they address different senses. And I really loved it. And I love to understand an area through, for example, touch, but then maybe watching at an image, or to hear a text about it, or to be led to something in the everyday life, because these different channels addressing my different senses, or the collaboration of different senses, opened my imagination, and I was invited to learn, to discover, and to go further within that specific subject, for example. And I think learning is, it's something, it's a privilege. And when I see children, or when I see people in the workshop, or colleagues figuring out, discovering it themselves, it is something very joyful. And it's much more joyful to figure it out by yourself, to find the jewel. You find the jewel, not having someone placing the jewel on your plate. And I feel that is these experiences with the teachers I had that had these qualities that really that inspired and gave me some direction how I would like to teach.
Yes, I would agree with the teacher stimulating curiosity, the teacher generating a context where the students begin to love exploring because they're discovering, and that discovery brings with it feelings of excitement and feelings of in a way, self-empowerment. I think observation is definitely a very big part of it. And, as you were talking about observing people standing at the tram stop, for instance, the possibility of being able to observe the world around us and be able to bring that quality into the studio. But both Bettina and I teach along the lines of John Skinner's initial discovery that people will be able to discover more interesting material when they're given space to both rest and to be with an idea, without the idea being spoon-fed to them. So in the kinds of classes that we teach, it's not so much the students copying what the teacher has shown them, but and that's where language becomes so important. The teacher presents something for the student to then explore and discover. It's another way of working. Some of us talk about teaching people to generate movement and imagery from the inside out rather than receiving information from that's given to them to reproduce from the outside in.
Yeah, I feel there is this connection to giving agency to people by holding that space, by giving information and stimuli, and let people discover by themselves how certain things, how they can work with, for example, principle, and to also stimulate curiosity to look for more. So to look for a relation in music or in philosophy, or to read the work of a writer. So to give, to open more windows, to continue, which I feel like for me it's a little bit like bringing somebody onto their own feet to walk. And to give agency, or to create a space to develop agency, or to notice that you have agency, and that you're not depending on a teacher, which I really feel very essential, because in the music world, in the classical music world, as well as in the dance world, I've also encountered situations where the teacher was very charismatic and had a lot of knowledge and skills, but somehow there was this relationship that was created towards the student to be depending on the teacher. And then there is the other side where the teacher is guiding you, but with the notion of giving yourself, or the student, his or her own autonomy.
You are basically answering for me a question of this shared knowledge that has been circulating since the 60s, and because I noticed over the last 15 years in various workshops with different artists and lecturers, that some of the things, and maybe it's a matter of my attention, that I in certain time pay attention to something, so I start seeing it everywhere. Right? It's like a question, and I see the answer in many forms around me. This question of, for example, certain exercises that I keep meeting through various people and slightly different form. If you can say, because I can remember, for example, from whom I have this exercise, but sometimes I cannot really tell because I transformed it so much, because when I worked with certain group or in a certain situation, I needed to modify it, or I needed to change it, or I had a question of mine that fed into it. Like, is there some material in your work that you recognize as a source from somewhere else? And is there some material that you totally recognize as you, as yourself, in different stages of your practice? Does it make sense?
Yes, it makes a lot of sense. I think we carry on ideas from one teacher to another, from one student to another, from student to teacher, from teacher to student, from one generation to another generation. So one of the things I wanted to add to ways of teaching is that in the ways that we tend to teach, and it's very much connected also to contact improv, is that the one who teaches is in there exploring with the students. So where we as teachers are continually discovering something that I may have met up with 15 years ago, 20 years ago, and tried out for myself in my classes will have transformed itself and will become something a little bit different, but continues to have the essential aspects of that first meeting, possibly. Or, like you say, sometimes you forget where it comes from, but you continue to explore it and engage with it.
Yes, and what you said now is also comes actually takes me back to my previous comment or question. This change of status of hierarchy, that the teacher actually works along with the students or the practitioners. That's what might be seen as threatening, because it does question hierarchy, and it does question from where you offer the work, and this thing of status. And it answers some of my questions of perhaps why certain forms or formats are not welcome in certain structures, because very simply it questions that structure.
Yes, and also the ways that we bring people together after going out and exploring a certain task. Or image or whatever we provide, we most of the time bring people together again and we share the information. There are many wonderful things that one discovers through doing that. One is that all of us have our own very individual ways of receiving information and processing it. So people begin to see that, oh, I'm not right, and I'm also not wrong. And that allows one to shed a certain degree of self-judgment or questioning, which very often stops the ability of the individual student from really putting themselves behind an exploration that they're doing. The other thing it does is it passes information through the group, and we begin to, all of us, have more information because it's shared information. And again, I, as a teacher, don't know everything and am really open to and wanting to learn more. And that definitely I can do through listening to my students in the way that they're also mutually listening to me and to everyone else who's present.
Yeah, I would add to...
No, I just wanted to say that you said that it is not being wanted in certain structures, or it threatens structures, just because it empowers the individual.
Yes.
And then the group that shares, so that can be threatening.
Thus it is political,
yes.
this work.
Exactly.
Yeah, I would also like to add that Eva and I, we are teaching, of course, as a teacher, you have a responsibility to hold the space, and you are navigating the process and the work somehow. But the work is within the bodies and the group and the time and the space. And yes, I prepare a class with a certain subject and a kind of vision where perhaps the next day needs to go to. But once we start the class, we start working with what is there. So there is also a lot about the process within the group and what kind of information is passing through, what is happening in terms of dynamic, what do we see within the group or the work that needs to be attended, which I can't foresee beforehand. And I think that is perhaps also a very specific aspect of how we work, that we work with this dynamic body of collective, of many individual bodies exchanging information, but also exchanging imagination and being in this process of creating. And I think that is also very political in the sense of that there are individuals within one space that have the same task, but they find their individual different ways of manifesting and working this task.
Mm-hmm. Totally. Thank you very much. I think we've reached an end.
Yeah, it was very beautiful end. Today we had the privilege to talk with contemporary dance personalities who are dedicated to the practice of improvisation. There were many valuable and inspiring ideas that I believe will continue to resonate with all of us. Thanks to Mish, Janka, Eva and Bettina for sharing them, and thank the audience for their attention. Goodbye.
I need to add something. What happened along the lines and also the workshop led by Bettina and Eva wouldn't be possible without a funding of EU Next Generation, Czech Recovery Plan and Ministry of Culture of Czech Republic. And of course, produced by Crew Collective.